Hello and welcome back to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. My name is Paul Healy and I'm joined as always by Mick O'Toole. And this is our second podcast of the week, isn't it, Mick?
Yes, you lucky people.
Trying to give you more. One of the main bits of feedback that we've got from people having put that missive out during the week is that we have been away too long and there's too much of a gap between our pods. So we're trying to give you more content as much as we can.
And if we break it in two, it lets it breathe a bit more so we don't cram everything into one pod.
Yeah. In case you haven't realised, we were doing one big podcast and we're splitting into two. We were talking to you earlier in the week about a great number of things that have already happened this week in relation to the Kinahan Hutch feud, and we're going to be talking about that again, funny enough, in this pod. But first, on our agenda today is in relation to politics, a subject that we rarely touch, except for when it comes into the realm of crime, and that is obviously because of the fact that we have a new Justice Minister, Jim O'Callaghan, and you were there for his first big, I suppose, press event where he was basically he's starting the gig now as of this week.
And shock horror, it was in his own constituency. Imagine that. So it was outside Irishtown Garda station. So essentially what it was this was on Tuesday. They are announcing a new Garda recruitment plan. And he and Commissioner Harris had a presser to discuss this outside, right on the corner there at Irishtown Garda station. So, yeah, he spoke to us. I say he spoke to us for about 10 minutes. I thought it was quite interesting, actually. You could see he was a barrister because he was talking, not off the cuff, but you could see he was used to answering questions and standing up and projecting himself. So it was a bit of a slightly different emphasis, I would say, from Helen McEntee, his predecessor. Anyway, so he was there to talk about the Garda recruitment. We ignored that really and wanted to ask him about one thing that's on our mind, which is the Kinahans.
Yes.
So essentially what has happened is, you'll know that in October last year, then Justice Minister Helen McEntee signed an extradition agreement with the United Arab Emirates, which includes Dubai, where the Kinahan trio, Christy Sr., Daniel and Christopher Jr. are all living. So there was great fanfare to that. And we asked him about what the story was. And it was interesting. I didn't realise this. The deal has been signed. He said it has to be ratified by Dáil Éireann for it to kick in. And I presume there's a statutory instrument, an SI or a commencement order. So basically he wants the Dáil to enact or ratify that extradition agreement as quickly as possible. And he said there might not even have to be a vote. So it might just be by unanimous acclamation or whatever it is.
Sorry to ask a stupid question, but I'm actually surprised that hasn't already been the case. And isn't it funny how politicians say things right before an election and you have a perception of one thing, and now we're learning that the fucking thing hasn't even been ratified?
Yes, and we might be showing our Achilles heel here, Paul. We're crime reporters and we're not political journalists, and they probably know the system better than we. I thought it had been enacted, I'll be totally honest with you. So
yeah,
he
me
said,
too, yeah.
I want it ratified as quickly as possible. I was going, Jesus, Johnny. So he said it's going to happen very, very quickly and things will flow from that, he says.
But as we were discussing, because people might be going, hold on a minute, I thought they were trying to get Sean McGovern home. This has nothing to do with Sean McGovern, because they already enacted the arrest of Sean McGovern and the attempt to bring him home prior to ever coming up with this extradition treaty. Is that right?
Yes, and my understanding, and I feel on very shaky ground here in relation to legislation, but my understanding is legislation cannot be retrospective. So in other words, you cannot have an extradition treaty and McGovern is in custody already. So there is a separate request. No. Well, I think I'm pretty happy he's in custody. There is a separate request prior to this extradition treaty for the separate extradition of Sean McGovern. You can explain why the guards want him back here.
Sean McGovern? Well, they want Sean McGovern back here for murder. So, I mean, there was a European arrest warrant issued for McGovern by the late AC John O'Driscoll all the way back in 2022, April 2022. When the sanctions were announced against the Kinahans, they announced that they wanted Sean McGovern for murder. And that is specifically the murder of Noel Duckhead Kerwin, who was shot dead in his car in Glendalkin, in the driveway of his home. And killed, we think, only because he was seen with Gerry the Monk Hutch at his brother's funeral. So Sean McGovern is believed to have been central to that plot to murder Noel Kerwin, and there has been a warrant out for him ever since. They knew that he had fled to Dubai, and we've already discussed this in the pod, but it was a hugely significant move in that the authorities over in the UAE then acted upon that warrant after a red notice had been issued by Interpol, and he was arrested. And we think is still in custody. Maybe he could be out on a form of bail, but he is fighting that extradition, we think.
Yes, and they also want to charge him as well as murder with directing a crime gang. So
Yes.
both sentences are very, very serious. Murder is mandatory life upon conviction. Directing a crime gang can lead to a life sentence, but there are a range of sentences up to the judge. But it is significant. So he's in custody. And we asked Mr. O'Callaghan about this and Commissioner Drew Harris. And they were both Drew Harris was explicitly saying, look, there's a judicial process underway. I'm not going to go down the road of talking about this, but we do know that the McGovern extradition is separate. I wanted to know, look, is it going to happen? And if so, when? And he didn't really want to go down that road.
I thought they were both very guarded on it. No, maybe I could understand why Jim O'Callaghan was, he's fresh into the job, and I suppose he's navigating that field of what he can and cannot say. Certainly, we had gotten to the point, beyond the point, where the Kinahans weren't being referred to by name. I mean, we openly had the Garda Commissioner and the previous Justice Minister talking about the Kinahans and bringing the Kinahans home. Now, all of a sudden, the language is he won't refer to them by name. Either that's because he's trying to be very careful because he doesn't know what he can say, or maybe we could optimistically say because something is going on in the background. We don't know.
And maybe he doesn't want to be seen to be prejudicing something, although you can't really prejudice something until somebody is before the courts in Ireland. You can't be in contempt or do that sort of thing. But maybe he's just been ultra careful. And I've said this to you before, Paul, in relation to McEntee. They know stuff that we don't. So they were both very cautious. But they did say, look, Mr. O'Callaghan did say, look, when the extradition treaty is signed, guards can effectively go after any criminal that is in Dubai. And the belief is there'll be a lot of criminals, but obviously the three most important are the three Kinahan men. So they'll obviously be in their sights when this is ratified or enacted or whatever it's called.
So do you think this will be the year? Will this be the year the Kinahans are brought back to Ireland?
And I think it's a make or break year. If it doesn't happen by the end of this year, it's a failure. I don't think they can sit there and go, into 2026.
Big statement.
I think it has to be done this year because that's an awful long time. And especially we know that there is a file of the DPP in relation to Daniel and the other two men, but in relation to Daniel of murder and all three about directing a crime gang. If it doesn't happen in 2025, I think it's curtains, really. I think this year has to be the year. Even for Sean McGovern, I don't think that could stretch into 2026 when they've asked for his extradition. So 2025, for me, is a really, really big year.
I'm still sort of stewing on what you were saying about ratifying that treaty. That it just, politics annoys me so much in that we literally we watched the photo op happen. We saw Helen McEntee over in Dubai getting her photograph taken. I understand these things take time, but God, the Dáil still hasn't ratified this bloody thing.
But do you know, I was thinking about this. So that was October that it was signed, and the election kicked off. The election campaign kicked off after that, really. And the government was only formed last week. Nothing else mattered. It was all about the election and it was about the government. So
there's no urgency for it. There's no urgency for it to get these Kinahans extradited.
No. Really the urgency, from what O'Callaghan was saying, was the urgency was getting this deal ratified and then they can go after the people. And I suppose it's up to the DPP still. But look, I got the impression he wants this done yesterday. So we'll see what happens. But it's up to him.
Well,
he's the minister. It's up to him to put it forward.
Minister, if you are listening, we'd love to ask you about this more in depth if and when there's an opportunity to do so. We'd certainly like to have him on, and not just about that, but on a variety of different things, including his plan to recruit more Gardaí, and certainly he has plenty of ideas about that. We'd love to talk to him about that.
Yes, so there were a couple of other interesting aspects of the presser that we had with him. He was very strong about urging people to come forward and join the Garda Síochána. So the government wants to recruit 5,000 Gardaí in the lifetime of this government, 5 years or whatever. I think that's very optimistic because now they didn't say increase the size of the force by 5,000 because they can't. Because if they have 5,000 recruits, how many people are going to resign? How many people are going to retire? They know how many people have to retire on age grounds, but it's a movable feast how many people will resign. I think it was about 140 last year. So obviously, if you get 800 a year, it'll probably be a net increase of maybe 400 or 500 because of the number of resignations or retirements. But he was quite bullish, and he did say, look, guards love complaining. No, like journalists, we love a good moan, right? And if there's that famous phrase in England and here, TJF, you know what that is?
Thank God it's Friday.
No.
Oh.
TJF.
TJF.
Right.
Oh, go on.
The job's fucked.
Oh,
right?
No, don't embarrass
That's what
me
they
with
say.
that one now.
TJF. Right?
I misheard you. Of course I
No,
know.
that's fine. Of course you know what that is. You know what, yeah. Anyway, right. So the guards love a good moan. No more than ourselves, right? But he was right. Basically going, being a guard's a great job. Being a guard, you get to see things, you get to do things. And he was talking about a sedentary job. This is not a sedentary job, and this is a great alternative, and you can help society. So he was pushing it.
I was just going to say, he does seem to be acutely aware. Now, we'll see whether it's put into action, but, the issue that keeps coming up again and again at these GRA conferences, and certainly guards will tell you, too many of them are spending too much time sitting behind a desk dealing with paperwork. And I heard Jim O'Callaghan say that he's aware of that, and he doesn't want Gardaí sitting behind desks. He wants them out on the beat. So he's saying all the right things.
Now, he said that. And it was very interesting because he said he met the commissioner last Friday, and he said, I told the commissioner last Friday, I want guards out of stations and out on the street or on the beat, right? But if you talk to guards, a couple of points. Firstly, there are 3,500 civilians. There is an issue with, I think they call it movement. You can move within the civil service. You don't join, very few of them join the civil servants to work specifically for the guards. You're transferred, right? And this can happen. You can, I think after a certain amount of time, you can move within the civil service. So they are losing people that way. But an awful lot of guards have already come out of the offices and desk jobs and are out in operational policing. And guards I'm speaking to are saying, well, how many people are left in office jobs because civilians are doing them? So I don't know. I think that one of the real issues is a lot of guards have gone into specialist units. It's a great thing. All the alphabets, all the initialisms, SDUA, NBCI, domestic violence, all that sort of stuff, right? They're specialists. But those specialists come from what is called the regular, the frontline response policing. So that has been a drain on the regular. Not necessarily office work, because I think an awful lot of the office jobs have already been eradicated.
Yeah, but did they not, for nearly every, scene that they attend or incidents, they've got to draft up X amount of paperwork, and that's slowing them down too,
And that's a massive problem. It's IMS, I think they're calling it, the new investigative system, that if you are involved in an investigation, there are tasks you have to put up on their computer and you have to fill that out. And the paperwork, they say, is killing them. It is an absolute nightmare. Now, to be fair, I know Justin Kelly, who's the deputy commissioner, when he was assistant commissioner, he met the unions and stuff, and he did listen to what they were saying, and he did make changes to make it a bit better. But there's no doubt there's a lot of paperwork for the guards.
So many exhaustive administrative things, checkbox things that they have to do. I mean, I think about the amount of times that we've had Gardaí come to us and have to probably take statements that they really didn't want to have to take, but it's part and parcel of the job. And and I know that they have to physically write out every single thing or lack thereof that we might say to them. So there's a lot of, I suppose, time wasting with that kind of stuff too,
And I wonder, and this is just off the top of my head, I wonder, will AI start to play more of a role in this? That there are various things that computers can do. Maybe the guard can just hit a button and it will do that. So the next 5 or 10 years are going to be very, very interesting in policing, because I think AI, we know that they're starting to use, or they want to use it for facial recognition. So, and I was listening to the tragic case of poor Noah O'Donoghue in Belfast, that the PSNI are using AI to look at CCTV from the area. So wow. I wonder, because that's lots of man and woman hours looking at CCTV. You can think of the high profile trials where guards have to sit through every frame. Okay. So I wonder, how AI will change policing, and it will be very interesting in the next 5 or 10 years.
It's I'm more worried about what it's going to do to journalism, but anyway.
Don't mention the war.
No.
Well, hold on a minute, Healy. Do you think AI can go and do doorsteps?
I think doorsteps might be a thing of the past, but not at the moment. But eventually, it's going to be something that's going to happen less and less. Because it's copy paste journalism. There's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of easy clickbait sort of stuff. But we'll keep on fighting the fight for as long as we can.
It's like the Alamo. We'll be surrounded by AI journalists, and we'll be shooting them all. Anyway,
right.
But anyway, so I'll just, the last point in this, he came across as quite confident. He came across as he wasn't combative, but he was holding his ground. So we're going to have a bit of crack, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly he's a different kind of politician to Helen McEntee. It'll be interesting to see how he approaches the job. And as mentioned, we'd love to interview him, have him on the podcast, and talk to him about a variety of different matters when it comes to justice. And so, look, we'll see where that goes. I want to ask I want to talk about the story that's come out, I suppose, again, but was broken by you. Let's look. Pat yourself on the back, will you?
We're a team, Healy.
Yes, pat ourselves on the back when possible. Why not? Because fucking everybody else does it. So.
No, this was about the file on the Garda investigation into Gerry Hutch being with the DPP. Now, look, I've written stories that I've thought have been my own. It happened. So I don't need to go down that road. But basically, the story is the file is with the DPP. There's a major Garda investigation into Gerry Hutch or the Hutch gang's alleged links to a rogue retired Garda called John Murphy, who's in prison for drugs offences. But he's also been investigated for his links to the Hutch organised crime gang. The belief would be that he was getting Gardaí, he was passing on sensitive information and sensitive intelligence to the Hutch organised crime gang. And as part of that investigation, Gerry Hutch was arrested and questioned in 2022, just before his murder trial that he was later acquitted of for David Byrne. Just before that trial, I think it was a week beforehand, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. He was taken out of prison, yeah.
He was Section 42'd. There's has to be a special warrant to get him out of prison, and he was brought back in, wasn't charged. But the NBCI, the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, had been investigating these alleged links for quite some time. Very complex file. It's now with the DPP.
Yeah, well, so that means that they are recommending a charge.
Yes, they have recommended that he be charged, and I think they've recommended that probably John Murphy. Now, there were 3 Gardaí investigated, implicated, suspended over this. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them was charged, I'll be honest. Others might be vindicated. Others probably will be cleared. But I think one of them is in trouble.
I understand what you're talking about. Is it possible, though, because I'm just thinking of the, and I'm not saying that this is what happens, but I mean, you can't help but think it's a possibility, given the fact that the previous trial against Gerry Hutch didn't go very well for the DPP. Would that be a consideration for the director now to look at this and say, look, we were unsuccessful in taking a charge against this person before. It was a high profile charge. We don't want to take that risk. Or can they only base it off the facts in front of them and say, look, this evidence is very strong? And I mean, like, does that come into the DPP's consideration? I wonder.
Mooney in the Sunday Times had a piece talking about how difficult this case is for the guards, because it's about proving who had control of phones and that sort of thing. So look, I'll put it this way. There might be charges. A conviction is a completely different kettle of fish. And we saw that with the David Byrne murder case.
Yeah, but that's what I'm wondering. If that is within the DPP's remit to say, look, I don't want to take this because of the risk that I don't think we can risk not securing a conviction, having not previously secured one already when it comes to this individual. Yeah. And if you don't take it against Gerry Hutch, then can you really take the case against John Murphy or anybody else? Because if you're alleging that John Murphy was involved in passing information to the likes of Gerry Hutch, well, then you've surely got to charge Gerry Hutch as well, or vice versa.
Yeah, look, I think that's fair, and it depends who you speak to. Some people would say, "No, there's not a chance of any charges." Others will say they think there might be. But look, we
It's a huge
certainly won't know.
gamble.
We'll only know when it happens. But yeah, look, the DPP will make that decision, and I suppose that law office has to look at things in the round, and it's all about public confidence in the administration of justice, and all that sort of stuff. That they're big decisions. So it'll be interesting to see.
And do we know the timeline roughly of when sensitive information would have been leaked to the Hutch gang? I mean, we're talking effectively in the midst of the feud. So what kind of information were they being privy to? That's the real question.
Yes. I don't know what I want to say about this, but I think the suspicion would be there was seriously sensitive information about charges and investigations.
I mean, that's huge, if true.
And remember, and you can speak on this, Mr. Hutch has also been investigated by the Spanish police. Now, he's not charged with either. We want to stress this. There's an investigation in Ireland and there's an investigation in Spain. He's not charged with either, but the guards have completed their file. The Spanish police are investigating him for something else.
For money laundering, yeah. He's for alleged money laundering. He's out on bail of €100,000. I mean, he had €100,000 to get himself out of jail. In fairness, he's a wealthy man, but he would say he can explain every penny of his wealth and his properties are all through legitimate business, through legitimate means. That's what he claims. So he believes he'll be found innocent of those charges if they take those charges at all. It's a different system in Spain in that Gerry Hutch was jailed, but he actually was imprisoned and then released on bail, even though he actually technically hasn't been charged. Whereas in this country, that wouldn't happen unless you were charged before the courts. He's not actually been charged with anything. He is a suspect accused of money laundering. And the state, as it were, over there in Lanzarote have not yet formally brought this to trial. Or so he hasn't been officially charged at all.
I'll put it this way, Paul. If I was a betting man, thankfully I'm not, I would not be putting money on Mr. Hutch being convicted in Ireland or Spain. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, no, I can't see it. Certainly not in this country anyway. I mean, unless the evidence is overwhelming and damning as such, where they've got him caught red-handed with a crime. I mean, that case, look, let's face it, that case, the Regency trial was an embarrassment for the state. They simply accused him of the wrong crime. And look, there was evidence there that he was potentially guilty of other crimes, of which he doesn't even deny. But he was accused of being the gunman, and he certainly wasn't proven by any stretch to be even in the country on the day, let alone being the gunman. And that was a dark day for the DPP, I'd say, and they not a day they want to soon repeat.
No. But Miss Justice Tara Burns played a stormer, really.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was a good day for justice, shall we say, from that perspective.
It was. And it proves that, look, it's not a kangaroo court. It is a court based upon facts and evidence. And, I mean, it has a 90% conviction rate. So, but in that case, the evidence was not there. I want to briefly talk about Cottle Crotty. We've obviously spoken about him on this podcast before, but I just thought it was a significant, huge development there just over nearly 2 weeks ago now, where he was resentenced upon an unusual step, which is the DPP appealing the very lenient, widely accepted lenient sentence that he received for a brutal assault on Natasha O'Brien in Limerick in 2022. Natasha O'Brien has been very, very brave and outspoken ever since, and their backlash to his suspended sentence last year was massive. We covered the story a bit ourselves. I doorstepped Cottle Crotty. He believed that he was going to get back into the Defence Forces. Of course, he had no chance.
Not a chance.
The presiding judge spared him jail on the basis of maybe he might be able to save his career in the Defence Forces, but in reality, there was no chance of that. And the DPP appealed it, I think, largely bowing to the public pressure, which shows that it works. It shows that putting stuff out there in the media and a reaction from the public does ultimately create a response in real life. I do think that's why the appeal was so quick. Maybe the DPP would have appealed it anyway, but I mean, they got straight in there and they appealed it straight away. And now they have successfully appealed the sentence, and the judge there and then on the day resentenced Cathal Croshy to 2 years in prison. So he had a fully suspended sentence, and he is now, I think, in Limerick prison, serving that 2 years, of which he'll probably serve just under a year. But nonetheless, he's got jail time, and that's the difference. He's been slapped with, I think, the correct punishment in this, because it was a unprovoked, violent assault on a woman. And do you know what really disturbs me with this case is the amount of people that are jumping on this and saying, there's something more to this. No woman deserves to be assaulted. Okay, it's just, no one deserves to be assaulted. Full stop. But she was violently put down by this man, who then, I think he made a crude comment to his friends about it afterwards, to put her down. Something to that effect. So he deserves jail time, and I think it was right. What do you think?
Yeah, listen. What struck me was Miss O'Brien spoke. It was a very good interview on RTE the day of it, and I know she said she feels after this verdict, she feels seen. That what happened to her has been acknowledged, and she feels acknowledged, which is very important, I think, for victims. But she from listening to the interview, she said she wasn't expecting what happened. And I think you're right, Paul. I think it does go to show you, I always say sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the sunlight in this case was the media coverage of what happened afterwards. And I was listening to her. There was a local journalist approached her outside the court when it happened, when he walked free. And she wasn't really expecting it to take off, because she thought it might be just limited to Limerick media. But it didn't. It blew up. It really did. And the results of that were massive. So, I think that's what our job is. They're stories for us, but they always have massive implications and connotations for the people involved. And I sometimes think we lose sight of that.
Yeah, I think, how something is covered in the media and then perceived by the public has a huge effect. And that's a very good example of that. I mean, there have been other cases where people have got suspended sentences and it has flown under the radar, sadly. This is one of those that I think just irked the public in such a way that there was a ferocious backlash to it. And I don't think the DPP had any choice. But aside from the public reaction, I mean, the facts of it are horrendous. I mean, it was a brutal, horrific assault of which he showed very little, if any, remorse. And even though a member of the Defence Forces was there speaking about his role in the Defence Forces, they weren't there to defend him. And I think the judge almost kind of took it like a character reference. That judge is now retired, when it wasn't supposed to be that. And, the Defence Forces certainly were not going to take him back. So I think there was a misperception, misperception by the judge there that maybe he might be able to save his career if he didn't jail him. That was never going to happen. So I think it's only right and just that he gets the proper slap on the wrist. It's more than a slap on the wrist that he deserves. Okay, what's next? I want to talk about your story about the ministerial protection and that larger issue as well, but in specifically the case of Leo Varadkar. Obviously, he had protection even after leaving office, but it's now been taken off him. Yes, so it used to be up until 2011, all former Taoiseach had what they would call a driver, they now call a protection officer, an armed Garda, and a Garda car, BMW, whatever, something like that. It was taken off 2011 when most of the ministers had their own Garda protection officers taken away because of the financial crisis. But when Leo Varadkar resigned as Taoiseach in April last year, the decision was taken to keep the protection officer on him and the protection and the Garda car. And I think that was because, look, we've written about, he was a hate figure for the far right. They really, people really did not like that man. I don't know if it was because of his sexuality or his Indian heritage, or they didn't like him. And he seemed to be the lightning rod. They were there are certain political issues upon which people immigration is a strong one that people are getting very incensed by. But I think a certain portion of that group that we're terming the far right, in particular, jumped on his sexuality and his nationality. And I think he got the brunt of it. In not, I mean, his successor didn't. Simon Harris did not get anywhere near that level of abuse. And again, the former children minister who's lost his seat, Green Party leader Roderick Gorman, also was very severely targeted. And you have to point out the fact that he is also gay. I think there is an element of homophobia there in relation to both men. They're both targeted in that way.
So I was wondering about security for Roger O'Gorman, because his security was increased at the start of the election. Now, he was assaulted while he was out campaigning. It wasn't connected to that. It was connected to the general risk assessment about him. So he had a ministerial driver, a protection officer. He got an extra detail, a special detective unit car with two lads, or two detectives in it, two armed detectives. So he had two cars. As did the Taoiseach, got an extra car, and the Taoiseach got an extra car. So that extra security was taken off. So the Taoiseach now has two cars, he had three, and the Taoiseach has one car, he had two. But Roderick O'Gorman lost his. I thought they might consider keeping his after he lost his ministerial portfolio, the way they did with Leo Varadkar. But his is gone, and Leo Varadkar's is gone. Now, my understanding from sources is Leo was quite happy about that. Leo Varadkar was quite happy about that. But I'm told he has been assured that it can be reinstated if the threat comes back. So obviously Garda have assessed this and decided the threat against him has receded significantly enough for that extra protection, or the protection, to be taken off. And it got me thinking, has the whole immigration issue died down a bit?
I mean, I'm probably not qualified to really answer that, only to say that there was a particular period of time there last year, maybe the year before, where there was an awful lot of protest, and that incident at the Coolock Crown Paint site in particular was maybe the culmination of that, and the Dublin riots prior to that. So I think it would only take another. I mean, there was a lot that kind of preceded the Dublin riot in particular. With the sentencing of Joseph Puska for the murder of Aisling Murphy. And then there was an incident in Parnell Square that really set things off. So I think we're only shy of another incident that could again spark another issue. But yeah, for the moment, I think it's somewhat died down. But you have the usual people who go out with their phones and shove them in people's faces, and they get lots and lots and lots of views on Elon Musk's X because they've got a blue tick and they're followed by a bunch of Americans and bots. But aside from that
sounds like me.
Aside from that, I don't think there's any major obvious threat, unless there is another, I suppose, incident that sparks off that outrage again.
Somebody who knows more about these things than I do suggested that immigration was a major issue in the local and European elections, but it had died down by November's election. That's probably fair.
Well, it's borne out, I suppose, in the way that people voted. Yeah, because you haven't seen too many of these quote unquote far right characters being voted in. So clearly a very small portion of the population at least reflects that in their ballot.
Okay. Let's move on. And it sort of, well, this is a difficult issue. I'll leave it to you. Santina Colley's father.
Yeah, I mean, there was a pretty major story in the UK. This is the murder of a number of children who were attending a Taylor Swift dance party type event in Southport, and they were all very young children. People will be aware of the story, and this absolute ruthless psychopath by the name of Axel Rudakabana came there and stabbed them to death, and it's a horrific incident, and he was sentenced there this month, just a week and a half ago, to 52 years in prison. He couldn't be given a life sentence because of the fact that he was a minor at the time.
Well, no, he was given a life sentence, but he couldn't be given a whole life tariff.
The whole life tariff that they have in the UK. Yeah.
So you remember, there's a couple of that police officer, Wayne cousins.
Yeah.
He got a whole life tariff, and it's not, very common for it to happen, but it is. They do say you're never getting out.
Yeah.
I think most people would think that this guy should never get out, but he couldn't because of his age.
And that has struck up quite a debate in the UK from, I suppose, the most extreme end of things, where people are saying that child killers like Rudy Cabana can't be rehabilitated and should be given the death penalty. And then you have people saying, well, they should lower the terms to be able to give someone like him a whole life tariff as well. I certainly would support myself a whole life tariff when it comes to heinous crimes. But I was actually contacted by Mike Cawley, whose daughter, his 3-year-old daughter, Santina Cawley, was murdered by his former partner, Karen Harrington, in Cork in 2019, July 2019. A lot of people remember the case because it's particularly horrific. Obviously, a very young child murdered by a woman, and the circumstances, the injuries that she had were particularly horrific. Mike, have spoken to him a few times over the years, but this is something that he actually contacted me about because he felt incensed and, I suppose, a bit triggered by this incident in Southport, because he just felt that, he saw the debate over it and he said this is once again a case of somebody murdering a child and the punishment does not reflect the crime. And he feels very much that the death penalty is the only crime for someone who carries out something of this magnitude, that you can't rehabilitate a child killer. And why have them in prison for X amount of years with Netflix and Wi-Fi and classes and all of that, if in the end of the day they're always going to be a child killer. And I do sympathise massively with his
view is entirely valid. Rudy Cabana, it was, I know we spoke about this, the evidence, it was extremely difficult to read. And those poor people, the poor families who saw the videos, one thing that it chills me now, there was a video of one of the children managing to get out, and he dragged the child back in. And I can't even think about that. And the number of stab wounds those children suffered, he is demonic. I'm sorry. He's demonic. There was no terrorism aspect to it, which is a bit strange. I think it was terrorism in my own.
Yeah.
He went to terrorize a community, and he did. But what can you say? Maybe you and I are lily liberals, but that man's demonic. I'm sorry, he is.
I suppose I've had the opportunity in this job to interview an awful lot of victims, and almost all of them would say that the sentence doesn't match the crime, that, they all feel that, from the most extreme to even not, that the punishment that the person responsible gets is not, just doesn't, they're always going to be looking over their shoulder wondering, is this person going to be freed one day? Am I going to have to deal with that? And in the case of Mike, he says that sometimes it feels like Santina was only murdered yesterday, and he says, if I still feel like that in 10 or 15 years time, when there is a reasonable prospect of Karen Harrington being released, how does that match what he's gone through? So he's been suffering all that time. He feels like his daughter's only just been killed, and then the person responsible is walking the streets. And what form of justice is that? I sympathise with that massively, but the point I was trying to make is those are the people actually affected by it. So there are a very small number of people, relatively speaking, to the population who actually understand the impact of a crime like that, and they very much often feel that the punishment doesn't match the crime, and many of them feel the death penalty is the only thing that warrants it. So that you have to listen to that. I certainly think, and this is something I would be asking the new Justice Minister, that we should why not have a whole life tariff like the UK here in this country, where certainly where a judge can give a minimum term to someone who's committed the worst of the worst crimes. So, you're thinking of the Graham Dwyers and the Joseph Puskas of this world. Why should a psychopath like that, who carried out a premeditated horrific crime, ever see the light of day again?
Sir Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, made a couple of comments which I thought were really, really interesting. Firstly, we know that this fella Ruda Kubana had been referred to an organisation called Prevent in Britain, which is to sort of stop you getting involved in terrorism. It's an official government body. And they examined him 3 times, assessed him 3 times, and decided he did not meet the threshold because he wasn't, but for me, it's terrorism. But Sir Keir Starmer basically said, we have to accept that there's a new form of terrorism about lone wolves like him, right? And I was watching the BBC News on Tuesday night, and they said something that Prevent, or the UK Counter-Terrorism Police, have been aware of 160 people who wanted to attack schools. To do like we have in Columbine, 160. It's not. I thought when I was listening to it, they said 160, and I thought, God, 160 terrorism plots in Britain. It's not. In the last year, 160 people have come to their attention for wanting to attack schools. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is, but there's a mental health aspect to this as well, of which I don't feel qualified really to talk about. But certainly, someone's mental health has declined to the point where they've become homicidal, particularly towards children. There's something seriously wrong there, and the fact that this person actually had been referred to and was being monitored and still yet it was missed, it says a lot about the system and that it needs to be overhauled and looked at. People might say, "Oh, mental health, so you're sympathetic to this person." No, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying there must be something going on, particularly in our generation now, that you've got young people like that. I mean, how old is Rudy Cabana? Was he?
He was 17 when he carried out the murders.
So what is going on in young people's psyche that they ever get to that point that they're thinking, I have to go and brutally butcher children? I mean,
it's horrific.
It's that sort of crime seems to be on the increase. I don't know why. And
I was really chilled when they said 160 plots to attack schools in Britain, because we've seen them all in England now or in America. Now, thankfully, in Britain, it's really hard to get access to firearms, so it's very unlikely you'll have a Columbine. There was one up in Dunblane in Scotland, and that led to firearms and handguns being banned effectively in Britain. So you're talking about knives like he had, but Jesus Christ, 160 people wanting to attack schools and plotting to attack schools. That does not bear thinking about.
No, it's fucked up. Well, look, I sympathise with Mike's point, and I think I would fight for his right to speak that, his truth on that. And if you agree with him or disagree with him, that's fair enough. But I think he's maybe more entitled to his opinion than others. He's actually lost his child in the most horrific way, and you have to sympathise with that pain that he's suffering. I'm sure there are many parents of those children in Southport who probably feel the same way.
Would anybody have shed a tear if a police officer from, I think it's the Lancashire Police, shot him dead that day?
No, I don't think so. No,
that's it.
So look, it's let's hope these types of crimes don't occur here. Certainly we've had incidents similar, all right, but nowhere near that scale. But look, we'll leave it there. That's probably a grim way to leave it, but that's the reality of some of these crimes that we report on. So thank you for listening to us, and we'll be back to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.